Yo, what's going on, you guys? It's AKOV here, and I'm just going to run you through an insight of one of my projects, my latest track, The Hunt, which is out on the Blackout Evolution series. So recently I've been experimenting a lot with other subgenres, but this is a bit of a return to my kind of aggressive neurofunk sound. And it's a bit of a strange one in the way that actually it was intended for my band Enigma. It's the first time that's kind of happened. It was originally supposed to be a rock song and ended up being a drum and bass one. The reasons for which I will go into in a second, but I started off with this bass riff here, which I wrote on my bass guitar and just transposed it to MIDI. And then I started layering a vocal on top of that. Originally, the idea of visualizing in my head was hunting rich people on horseback and killing them and cutting them up and feeding them to the poor. Because, you know, that's what goes through my head sometimes. I'm not a communist, I swear. And this is the vocal I recorded over it.
I'm the rich, and I feed them to the poor. I'm the rich, and I feed them to the poor. I'm the rich, and I feed them to the poor. I'm the rich, and I feed them to the poor. I'm the rich, and I feed them to the poor. I'm the rich, and I feed them to the poor. I'm the rich, and I feed them to the poor. I'm the rich, and I feed them to the.
So anyway, when I got to this point, I realised it bear a bit too much resemblance to Drowning Pool, Let the Bodies Hit the Floor. Don't know if you remember that song from, I think it was like the early 2000s. Let the bodies hit the floor, let the bodies hit the floor. So as a rock song, I felt like it wasn't really original enough to, you know, in a different context it's fine. So I thought I'd try and make a drum and bass track out of it. And as a result, it's one of the first songs where I'm actually kind of writing the intro first. I usually focus on the groove and the drop of the track first, but this was kind of working the other way around. So anyway, the elements I started to build around it to try and get that build up. Just some sort of kind of war drums here, using Addictive Drummer. Again, just following the same rhythm. The rhythm that I was actually writing in my head, I wanted it to sound like kind of riding on horseback, so it had that kind of gallop to it. And it builds up into, the drop is basically the same idea as the original riff that I wrote. So let me just run you through my drums quickly. So starting with the kick drum, I've got kick 2 here, which is a great VST for making kick drums. I then took that kick sound in particular and freeze and flattened it, or bounced it to audio for those of you that don't use Ableton, and dragged it into Impulse, which is just a small drum machine in Ableton, and pitched it up nearly 2 octaves, just so that they're far enough apart that the other sound will then start to resemble more of like a transient of a snare. And that's how I sort of match the punchiness between the kick and the snare. Those are the most prominent features in my mix usually, so that's always what I tend to try and push out of that. I've also then just put a little EQ on there and boosted it at around, I think it should be around 200, just to get that kind of sweet spot in your ear. Then for the snare, let's just listen to these together. Excuse me. With the snare, there is a noise layer. That's literally just a white noise generated out of the operator, and then I've taken a little bit of the beginning out of it, just so I've just faded that out just so that the transient comes through nicer. And on the Addictive Drummer, I've used that for the main snare layer. And as you can see, I've changed the envelope at the front there so that it doesn't interfere so much with the transient again. And I made it pretty wide. It's got a lot of room level, overhead level. Again, absolutely love Addictive Drums. It's great for a track like this where you're trying to make a sort of synthesized rock song as well. I just want those kind of rocky sounding drums. And then the rest of the drums were just kind of layering kind of hats and kind of shakers and cymbals around it. So that little shuffle I think is from a break that was in the Black Sun Empire pack. These are just some hats from my pack. Little white noise again just at the beginning hit, which is sort of synthesizing an open hat, but I prefer to use this time. Excuse me. And yeah, another cymbal layer. So all together, the drums sound like this. Nice and simple. I've tried to keep the mix, or all my mixes I tried to keep as simple as possible. So the entire project itself is actually only 75 separate tracks. And not even all of those are necessarily being used. I don't double up any tracks to save space, but I do try and keep the projects as minimal as possible. It makes mixing it a lot easier in the end. So yeah, let's move on to the bass, which was the same riff as I mentioned earlier, the one that I wrote in the build-up. It was exactly the same MIDI, but now I've split this bass into 3 different sections. I will start with, well, obviously we've got the sub here, no one needs to know about that, it's just a sub. But this was the original sound. As you can see, I've just got the side chaining here, kick, snare, and I'm using the Ozone 8 imager to just get some wideness out of it. And if we look at the sound itself, it's nothing too fancy, just a little stab sound. That's the kind of shape of it's been generated in the envelope here, and I'm using a frequency modulation from oscillator A with a wavetable that I think came from an ASL pack, and that was just the kind of higher layer. Originally I had taken all the bass out with a filter here, but that was the sound originally. But then I wanted a bit of a clearer, when it was in the entire mix it didn't come through so well, so I wanted a bit of a clearer sound, so this just became a high layer, and the main sound developed into this, which had a bit more kind of crunch to it, and I achieved that again just using a square wave FM from A, and this was using the harmonic subtle wavetable, and there's not really much going on. The compressor brings out a lot of this sound here. Sounds kind of underwater without it, as you can hear. The distortion's not really doing much. It's just the EQ and the compressor and the filter that are really bringing that out. And it's just the shape here with the band filter as well. But altogether, that with the sub and the high layer, it kind of adds that extra, well, the high layer combined with this main bass sound makes it sound a bit more like a guitar chug. It's got that kind of fizzy top. Then to go into more detail with the rest of the edits, there's just little bass stabs here. What I do is I just go through a lot of projects that I have that never really become much. I might have just accidentally made a nice sound, cut them into lots of different stabs and just arrange them into packs, and that's really helped with my production, just to have all these sounds readily available. There's some stabs here, these ones. That's just to sort of help keep the note at the beginning. These sounds that I've just pitched up a couple of octaves. It's always try that, especially in Ableton. It's got great the warp modes, different, like either on beats or tones. You can get some really nice stretched sounds, but if you pitch up some kind of deep sounds and get some interesting tones from them, that's what I've had here with just these little edits. And then just got a little bit of a machine gun bass here, which sounds like this, combined with the drums. I've also taken the vocal here. It was just the word poor and just pitched it down, just sounded quite goofy, I liked it. It's got quite a simple but aggressive rhythm. A lot of the things I focus on in tracks is just try and get that. I just try and imagine myself in the club and what kind of rhythm would make me want to dance, and for me that was quite a motivating, simple but heavy kind of groove. Those are always the songs that I like the most, the ones that just have a groove that make you really want to move, and it's simple enough but also shows off the producer's abilities. after the first 16, I then switch up the groove a bit, start to introduce some different sounds so it doesn't get boring, then return to the original groove after the next 16. And then I'll start focusing on the more musical elements. So I actually wrote first this section here, which was, like I told you, the original idea I had, then worked my way through the drop, then got to this section before I'd actually finished the song. I wanted a bit of relief from the kind of endless, relentless kind of anger that this song is, and it was just supposed to be a nice calm moment that you just sort of have in the club or wherever you're listening to it, just as a bit of release from all that, and then it starts to build up. And this was just a chord pattern I was playing with. And this is in fact, I think, just a preset from that's already built into Serum there. But it was that layered with this FM8 sound. And some strings. How nice, relaxing, but not for long. So the bass line in the second drop was just development. It's the same sound, but I just switched up the actual kind of placement of the notes. So that's just a quick overview and a bit of an insight into my project. I hope that was kind of interesting for a bunch of you guys. And yeah, hope you're keeping yourselves entertained in this very boring lockdown time. Let's hope we get back to shows soon. Peace. Bye.